Every year, there's some team that comes out of the woodwork that we didn't see coming, that we weren't talking about nearly enough. So I'm going to do my best to guard us against that before we get too close to spring football and beyond, but we're going to do our best here. Now, again, sleeper teams. So I'm not talking about Georgia. I'm not talking about Alabama. I'm not going to talk about Tennessee or LSU either. LSU played for a conference title last year. Tennessee was in the college football playoff mix. So if either of those teams popped onto the scene and won a SEC title, you wouldn't be overwhelmingly surprised, right? Like, they're probably not the team that you're picking at this point in time, unless you reside in Baton Rouge or in Knoxville, Tennessee, in which case we're glad to have you part of the program. But they're probably not the team that's going to be the odds-on favorite in Vegas. So who could be the team that sneaks up and makes a play at this conference? How about South Carolina? We had Shane Beamer on the show last week, it was, maybe even earlier this week, and he was telling us about how much momentum, how much energy is going on outside that program. Yes, but internally, they're not worried about being a good story. They have aspirations much higher than just winning 8 games and playing for a nice bowl game. Remember how they finished the year. They beat not one, but 2 top 10 teams. Spoiled both Clemson's and Tennessee's chances at making the college football playoff. Let's imagine for a second the team that played in those 2 games to end the regular season. Let's imagine they show up and they play the entirety of their schedule. Because it didn't really feel like Spencer Rattler and that offense totally clicked until the end of the year. They were dinged up all over the field. They had a tight end playing running back. What if they are able to, 1, stay healthy, and 2, mesh like that from the jump? Spencer Rattler, another year under Shane Beamer. Dow Loggins going to keep that professional style of offense, but also have some of the new age concepts blended in, again, per Shane Beamer when he was on the hard count. I think they're scary. I think they're very scary because think about how Tennessee won games last year. Think about how Tennessee was one of the sleeper teams in the SEC. The offense just caught its stride and was just the problem for the opposition every single week. Like, it didn't matter what they didn't have defensively because the offense was going to score 50, try and catch us. If Spencer Rattler and Juice Wells are able to keep that same tempo they had to end the year going forward, I think you're going to have to deal with South Carolina. Now, I'm not picking them to win the whole conference, but in terms of a sleeper team, you better at least be ready to deal with them. Okay? So South Carolina, definitely a team that we need to pay attention to before we get too far into the fall season. Really quickly, though, if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, would love to have you a part of this. The Hard Count is live twice a week. We appreciate you being tuned in. And if you have not yet followed me on Instagram or on Twitter, at Judy Pickell, great medium for us to hear from you. Let's talk about the Florida Gators. They have a transfer quarterback in Graham Mertz. And a wide receiver for the Gators, Andy Jean, went on the record and said, I think Graham Mertz could be like a Joe Burrow, where he transfers into a new system and is able to have a ton of success. Now, I think Andy Jean was probably being a little bit hyperbolic there. But let's just imagine for a second that Graham Mertz makes good on what he was evaluated as out of high school. In that 2019 class, Graham Mertz was a top 5 quarterback. And Florida's defense has some things they got to patch up. They lose 7 starters. But the defense wasn't really winning you a ton of games last year, was it? I know they made timely plays, but I mean week in and week out, were you depending on that defense to win you the football game? Probably not, right? Gave up right around 30 points a game. Imagine you have more consistent quarterback play. That run game continues to move forward. You have 2 of the best young backs in the country in Trevor Etienne and Montrell Johnson. Imagine you have that run game, consistent quarterback play, and the defense just sort of stays the same. You'll have to deal with Florida, and that's not asking Graham Mertz to be a game breaker, but if he ends up being one of the better quarterbacks in this conference, Anthony Richardson was really talented last year, did a lot of really good things for this team, but there were times where he was inconsistent, and that cost you football games. I think the Kentucky football game, that cost you. I think you didn't get enough from him as a dual threat against Vanderbilt. I think that cost you. That's at least 2 wins right there, and that gets you to 8 wins. So if the defense takes another step forward, that could be exciting. They just hired Austin Armstrong. You got to keep an eye on Florida is all I'm saying, because you don't know how Graham Mertz will factor into this whole thing. A lot of talent, a lot of ability. We'll see what happens there. If they can supplement a quarterback with that monster run game, keep an eye on Florida. I think they're a dark horse in the Southeastern Conference. Now, here's a team that I think we're all talking about at this point in the year because of how much talent they have, and that's Texas A&M. Since 2019, they have had a top 10 recruiting class. Now, that is excluding the 2023 class, okay? So just kind of cut that off. From 2019 to 2022, they were within the top 10. What does that mean? It means there's a lot of talent on that roster. And that was one of the reasons why we were so frustrated with Texas A&M across the board last year, because we knew they were capable. We knew they had guys that were just straight up better than whoever they were playing against. You don't think Texas A&M had more talent than Appalachian State? Absolutely they did. But from a game plan perspective, they weren't able to put that talent in position to succeed. So Jimbo Fisher, whether he was forced to, whether he did by his own decision, I think still showed some humility and hires Bobby Petrino to be the offensive coordinator. I say this a lot for Texas A&M. Is it the chiropractor protocol? Is it where you show up and you feel sore, you feel out of whack, you're not aligned, and then after one appointment, after changing one thing on your staff, one correction, you're good to go. You feel like a new person again. This offense, this team as a whole, has a whole new outlook. I think it's worth talking about because Connor Weigman, even though they weren't having a ton of success from a win and loss standpoint at the end of the year, Connor Weigman is still a guy that you can win with. I wholeheartedly believe that. The way they finished the year against LSU, they showed you they've got some pieces on campus. Now, the transfer portal hurt them. That's absolutely true. But again, you did not lose all of that talent from 2019 to 2022. All those top 10 classes, there's still a healthy amount of that still in-house in College Station. So for Texas A&M, the cupboard's stocked. The cupboard's stocked. Are they a team that just with one correction on the staff, they go from 5 wins to, dare I say, 10 wins? All right, I'm not predicting it, but hypothetically, if you're talking about sleeper teams, you have to include Texas A&M. Same thing with South Carolina. The offense could be explosive if they pick up where they left off. How much of a problem is South Carolina for the opposition going forward? For Graham Mertz in Florida, he's a huge question mark. How does he translate to their system? He was iffy at Wisconsin. Can he be consistent at Florida? If he can, that's something you didn't have last year. As good as Anthony Richardson was, you did not have consistent quarterback play week in and week out. And if you did, I think you win at least 8 games a year ago. Now with that running back room, having another offseason, able to get a little bit more comfortable after their first year on campus for both Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne, could mean problems for the SEC. So you still have your front runners. You still have Georgia, Bama, Tennessee, LSU. I would still say those are probably the top 4 odds-on favorites. You're betting money in Vegas, but for these 3 teams, I think they have to be considered as sleeper teams in the Southeastern Conference. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.